Hey everyone, it's Zack Beck. The topic of taxes seems to be at the forefront of discussion in Washington, D.C. right now. That is because President Biden and the Democratic Party are proposing a $3.5 trillion spending package that seeks to raise taxes on individuals exceeding a certain income threshold. This has led to a feverish discussion throughout our society, including AOC wearing a dress at the Metropolitan Gala where she actually had the words "tax the rich" on the back of her dress. This sparked criticism from people on one side of the aisle saying she was being hypocritical for doing this, and others at that same event said that she was being a champion of those who want to see taxes raised on an income threshold exceeding a certain amount. So what I want to do in this video is break down in detail what is actually in this proposal, who could actually expect to have your taxes raised, if your taxes might actually be cut, the likelihood that this actually could become law, and also what is currently structured in our tax system, and do we indeed tax the rich, and is everyone indeed paying their fair share? So let's take our time, dive into the details, jump into it right now. As previously mentioned, the topic of taxes is being hotly debated in Washington, D.C. right now. That is thanks in large part to President Biden's proposal to have a $3.5 trillion spending package, which includes tax increases. Now, before we go into the depths of what is actually in that proposal, I think it is important for us to take a step back and understand kind of our tax system here in the United States as a whole. And that is where we can look at the year 2020. The United States federal government spent $6.6 trillion. Now, bear in mind, 2020 was a bit of an anomaly because we had the pandemic and additional stimulus measures and extraordinary measures taken by the federal government to prop up the economy and hopefully get us through the pandemic. But either way you look at it, we had a $6.6 trillion budget last year. That $6.6 trillion budget equals $19,962 per person here in the United States. Now, this budget includes a range of things, ranging from Social Security to Medicare to defense spending to debt interest payments and a lot of other government programs that exist that maybe you and I don't even know about. So from that perspective, there's a lot of spending happening on an annual basis by the federal government, and that spending has to be paid for in some way, shape, or form. Now, the basic way we can look at this is that each resident or each citizen here in the United States has to pay taxes, and those taxes go to both the local government, the state government, and then the federal government. And that could be coming in a variety of manners, but the way that you and I mostly interact with the federal government when it comes to our taxes is through our income taxes. And from that vantage point, you will see people pay a different tax depending upon how much income they have. And that is where you see people trying to maybe itemize their deductions to reduce their tax liability, to not have to pay as many taxes to the federal government. But with all that being said, we have a $6.6 trillion budget that we had last year, and what we're seeking right now from the Biden administration is to actually increase that by $3.5 trillion. Now, this is a huge spending package. There's a lot in it, but when you look at the actual debate or the argument on both sides of the aisle, what you will see happen, and this is not necessarily that everyone actually believes these things because people tend to be somewhat hypocritical in Washington, D.C., but for the most part, to break it down simply, people more in the Democratic Party generally tend to believe in bigger government and more government spending. Therefore, you'll generally see maybe tax increases more likely underneath a Democratic administration and a Democratic Congress. On the flip side, the Republican Party says that they believe in lower taxes and less government, and generally they're more in interest of having less government programs as a whole. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. Obviously, we could see individuals like the Bush administration racked up the debt, even the Trump administration racked up the debt, but if you don't, and then the Obama administration, you could argue, did some good things with spending, but some bad things with spending. So all that to say, I'm just breaking that down, not from the actual reality of what's going on, but how people campaign on both sides of the aisle, and maybe there is hard beliefs on both sides. Now, when we look at this individually here when it comes to this $3.5 trillion bill, there is some implications for you and for myself when it comes to the tax code. But before we get into that, we just need to understand that every individual has to contribute in some way, shape, or form for us to have a working and thriving society. There can be arguments about how much each person should be spending and how much each person shouldn't be spending relative to how much income they have, but overall, we all have to contribute in some way, shape, or form. Not here to argue for higher taxes or lower taxes, just saying that we all have a little bit of responsibility in our society and in our democracy to make a difference. Now, when we look at this most recent proposal coming out of the Biden administration, it's important to know what they're actually seeking to do. This $3.5 trillion plan has a lot baked into it. I made a separate video specifically about all the details in there. I'll put a link up here and you can actually check that out if you want. But when it comes to the tax rate, what they are proposing is to actually increase taxes on those who make more than $400,000 a year for an individual single filer, and those who make more than $450,000 a year for a joint filing couple that's actually married. So you're going to see that if people actually see this bill can become law, you might see taxes increased on those who make more than $400,000 a year. This would be taking that top rate and moving it from 37% to 39.6%, and that was actually reduced in the Trump administration by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. So what we would be seeing is a reversing of that policy and potentially taxes being raised on those who make more than $400,000 a year. Now, anyone making over $400,000 a year is very wealthy in our society, especially when you consider that the median income here in the United States is just over $31,000 a year. So someone making $400,000 is exceeding that significantly. But when you look at people who might be at an even higher income threshold, maybe over $1 million, $10 million, or even you look at corporations over billions of dollars, it starts to put that $400,000 in relative perspective. So that is something for you and I to be aware of when we're thinking about how this tax structure is actually put into place and what we might be deeming fair or unfair when we think about who should be paying what in our society. So from that vantage point, I want to do right now is take a look at our current structure and who's actually paying taxes and how much that actually makes up of our current budget as a whole. With that in mind, let's take a look at what actually could classify as being very rich in the United States right now. And this is important for us to be aware of because you and I might have different ways of perceiving the rich. We might see someone as being rich as like owning a yacht or a mansion, or we might consider someone as rich who just owns a single family home, especially for you millennials out there right now who continuously get ruined from the 2008 financial housing crisis, and now once again in the pandemic, it seems like it's impossible to buy a home. I've talked about that in other videos, you can check that out altogether. But when we look at it from a purely financial perspective, we often talk about the 1% in our society, and if someone reaches the 1%, they might be considered very wealthy in the United States. And what it would take to actually categorize yourself into that in the last year would have actually been someone who makes a total adjusted gross income of over $540,000. And during the last year, nearly 1.4 million tax filers fell into this category. So that's over 1.4 million either individuals or joint filers who already exceed $540,000 a year. Relative to the rest of our society, that equals about 1%. So if you've exceeded that, you're in the 1%, but if you're not in that, you're like the rest of us, myself included, we're in the 99%. What we'll find is that those in the 1% account for nearly 21% of the entire adjusted gross income in the United States as a whole. So only 1% of the individuals who are in that category make over 21% of what's actually made in the United States every single year. And when you dive a little deeper into the numbers of those who are actually in this category, they actually tend to make more money on their investments as opposed to their labor. So this is a very important thing for us to be aware of. Obviously, if we have aspirations to reach that type of income level, or if we just want to have more financial security long term, it highlights the importance of having your money work for itself long term by investing your money and actually letting it do the work instead of just solely focusing on how much money you can make every single hour where you're required to actually conduct work yourself. So this is a very interesting dynamic. It's often overlooked by most people in our society, but that is a very interesting detail I think we should be aware of. That is because nearly 67% of the income that's reported in that 1% is made from capital gains on investments. When you flip that around, if you look actually at the bottom 50% of those who actually are in the United States from a tax filing perspective, they actually only have 11% of their income coming from capital gains. So clearly there's a difference between those who are investing generally fall into a higher income category versus those who are not investing generally fall into a lower income category. There could be arguments made that maybe individuals with lower income obviously don't have as much access to expendable capital where they can go and invest, and you might say the other individuals have inherited money, might be trust fund individuals or whatever it might be. So there is definitely a lack of equity in that perspective and from that conversation, but it's just an observation from a statistical perspective that we see this deviation between these groups. Now, when we look at the actual taxes paid by these individuals on the 1%, they actually paid over 37% of the overall taxes in the United States as a whole. So you're seeing a big difference is that that individual group obviously makes more money, but then they spend more money as far as taxes are concerned going back to the society. Not here to maybe defend them or anything to that extent, it's just an observation. So when you hear people saying tax the rich, we really need to understand, are we doing that already, and who actually classifies as someone that's rich? Because there is a big difference between someone who makes $540,000 $100,000 a year versus someone who makes $1 billion a year. So there's a big wide gap, and we often find ourselves arguing between those in the very high category that is relative to ourselves, like someone who's making that $500,000 a year versus someone who's making $30,000 a year. That seems astronomical, but then when you think about someone at the very top, maybe in the 0.01%, that's when it gets crazy. Now that we've seen some of the top line assessments from the tax code, let's take a look at this chart, which actually shows it in great detail. Starting right here, it shows those who are in the bottom 50%, making less than $43,600 a year, their share of the income earned is 12%, and their share of all income taxes paid is 3%. Now those who make between 25 to 50%, they're in the top 25 to 50%, ranging anywhere between $43,000 all the way up to $87,000 a year, their share of the income earned is 19%, whereas their share of the income taxes paid is 10%. Then we continuously go up the ladder. Those who are in the top 10 to 25%, basically anywhere between $87,000 to $152,000 a year, their share of the income earned is 21%, whereas their share of the income taxes paid is 16%. Then we look at the top 5 to 10%, those who are between $152,000 and $218,000, their share of all income earned is 11%, and their share of all income taxes paid is 11%. So that's the one group right now where we're seeing it completely the same on both sides. Then if we look at the top 2 to 5%, basically anyone above 218 all the way to 540, they are having their share of the income earned is 16%, whereas what they have when they actually have their taxes paid is 20% of the overall taxes paid. Then the top 1%, those exceeding that $540,000 category, they are at 21% of all income earned, and their share of all income taxes paid is 40%. So what we are seeing is that basically over time, those in the higher income categories tend to pay more and more taxes. So when we hear individuals argue on one side or the other about who is paying their fair share, it's really not something that we have to be necessarily arguing about. We just need to observe what are the facts of the situation right now, because perhaps what we need to do is have a different kind of approach when it comes to our taxes, and not just capping at $540,000 and having that tax bracket be the same all the way moving forward. We might want to look at different taxes going all the other way. Now on the flip side, you could have someone argue and say, hey, I want to have lower government, less government programs, less spending, and we just need to have the same tax rate across the board. Call it 9%, 10%, whatever it is. So you can see there are different arguments, but this is where it is right now. I don't see a huge reformation in our tax code where we're going to all pay 10% of our income or anything like that, nor do I see us raising our taxes to astronomical levels like we see in other European nations that you might see in like France or Norway or anything like that. But generally what we have right now is this proposal coming out of the Biden administration, and this is where people start to get very nitpicky and start to get in arguments, and we tend to miss the forest for the trees when it comes to how much money people are making and how much money people are spending when it comes to their taxes, because obviously all of us like to not have to spend as much when it comes to our taxes. So I want to take a moment here and look at this and think about this in a little bit of a deeper way. One of the unfortunate things in our society is that we do not value financial literacy or make that a priority in our educational system. So someone can go through the entire educational system and actually graduate college and still not understand the differences between what it is to actually have debt versus actually investing your money, how you can balance a checkbook, whether or not you should have a savings account. Those kinds of basic things people don't even necessarily know how to do by the time they're an adult and they're actually starting to take on these responsibilities. And because of that, I think we have a little bit of a misperception of what actually money does in our society. We sometimes think that there's this finite, almost if we think about money as like a total pie, and we think that there's only so much money in this overall pie that if I were to take something from that pie, that takes it away from someone else. Basically what that boils down to is that we might think that in our society there's only a finite amount of money available, and if I take some money away from society, then I'm taking it away from someone else. Whereas what we actually should look at when we think about money in our society is that money is infinite, meaning that that pie can continuously grow and expand. Obviously as our economy expands, as we create new products, as we develop new resources and we do different things, we will find that more money tends to become available for more activity that's going on. Therefore, the more money that you earn, you're not necessarily taking it away from someone unless you're a bad person, you actually are, but generally speaking, that is kind of our perception of money. So we tend to have maybe a negative view of someone who makes more money than ourselves because we think they're taking it away from us. Therefore, when we get into a type of argument where it's like tax the rich or cut taxes for us, whatever that argument tends to be, and it's real easy to get kind of emotionally tied into that because we might feel as though someone has something that we want and we don't have it because they took it. And not to say that there isn't any sort of inequity in our society, because there clearly clearly is. We're seeing a bigger gap grow between those who have and those who do not have in our society. But I'm just saying, if we, instead of focusing on what other people are making and what other people are doing and what they're paying, we can focus more on our own personal development, take personal responsibility to try and find ways to generate more income, to actually have more resources to invest so we can grow our net worth over time and hopefully lead that on to future generations like our kids and grandkids who could also have that same type of philosophy and mentality. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. If you wouldn't mind, please tap the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Help push this video to other people who might need to hear it. Furthermore, if you have any questions, please comment down below. I'd love to interact with you, get to know you, do any research on your behalf so you can make wise and well-informed decisions moving forward. Furthermore, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot to myself personally, as I do everything I can to create positive content that makes a positive impact in your life by encouraging you and myself to lead lives of meaning and purpose, all while maintaining balance and moderation. And if you do subscribe to the channel, please tap the notification bell. That will notify you every time I post a video, which I do on a weekly basis. Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you next time.